Chairman, I want to speak to my supplementary order paper amending clause 16 of this bill, and it inserts a new clause, 45Y, which is headlined New Zealand ownership. And I want to read it to the House. It's very simple, very clear. No person, other than the Crown, may have an interest in shares or securities of a mixed ownership model company unless they are tax resident in New Zealand. Subsection 2 applies the same thing to companies and other entities. What this does, Mr. Chairman, is that it says before we sell the shares, there must be an enduring relationship between the person or the organisation who purchases the shares and New Zealand. And that means, according to the definition in the Income Tax Act of tax resident, that the person must live in New Zealand for a minimum period of time each year, a month out of 12. What this clause does, I accept it's the second best solution. You know, the best solution is not to sell the shares at all. That keeps the shares publicly owned by all the mums and dads of New Zealand, owned by Kiwis as a whole, built by our forebears. And when I say that, Mr. Chairman, I say that in relation to your electorate, I think, with some real feeling. My wife was born in the Waikato, in a little town called Mangakino. Her dad came back after 4 years as a prisoner of war, and he worked on the Whakamaru Dam. And I tell you that Pat Moriarty would turn in his grave if he thought that asset was being sold, and he'd turn in his grave twice if he thought it was being sold overseas. You know, I want to keep this government honest. I'm from the opposition and I'm here to help them. This is what John Key said just a couple of days before the election. Quote, "We're giving people a commitment," mark that word, commitment, "that 85 to 90% of the entire company, meaning the power companies, will be owned by New Zealanders. That is my commitment to them tonight." Now, I say this, Mr. Chairman, here we are in the House tonight debating the legislation that the Prime Minister was talking about, and I want one member of that National Party government to take the call and tell the House where in this bill is this commitment delivered. It is not. That was, Mr. Chairman, pure deceit by the Prime Minister. He promised something to New Zealanders and he never delivered it. He never delivered it. Now, I know what New Zealanders feel about that. They think they've been had. They accepted the word of the Prime Minister. Nice guy, lovely smile. He's broken this word and he's broken every other thing that he's promised to this country. And just the other day he was talking about class sizes and he said he wouldn't be so arrogant as to ignore what a majority of New Zealanders thought. Well, I asked the Prime Minister to apply that logic to the question of ownership of New Zealand's assets. Every public opinion poll has shown 2 to 1 that New Zealanders don't want to sell their assets. What is it about that the National Party doesn't understand? I was watching the Bay Roskill Vikings play against Manarewa the other night. I defer to my colleague from Manarewa. They won by 66 to 10. In the hour and a half that I had to walk down both sides of the sideline, I got 123 signatures calling for a referendum so that we don't sell our assets. 98% of them signed, 98%. That's really interesting. The same percentage of the 1,450-odd submissions that opposed this government selling New Zealand's assets. They don't want the assets sold. The National Party in government is doing something against the wishes of New Zealand, and that will come back and haunt them. Now, that National Government knew what it was going to do all along. I've got the Treasury documents here advising the National Party about the assets. The Treasury report says that a significant participation by foreign investors will be essential to achieve the government's overall objectives. A significant proportion. When did the Prime Minister acknowledge that in the debates before the election? Where in this bill, Mr Chairman, where in this bill is there anything that acts on the Prime Minister's commitment to New Zealanders that only maybe 10% of those assets would be sold off? We know that's not going to happen. There is a 10% figure in here. It says that no person should be able to buy more than 10% of the entire assets. You know what that means, Mr Chairman? It means that 2 Russian oligarchs, 2 Chinese state companies and 1 American pension fund could buy up half of New Zealand's energy companies, not only to own half of the shares, but effectively to control it. That is a farce, Mr Chairman. That is a disgrace. And those National Party members of Parliament, particularly those that will lose their seat next time, should bow their head in shame, because they will vote tonight against the commitment that the Prime Minister made to New Zealanders. Mr Speaker, further than that, the Treasury says you've got to sell it to foreigners because that'll push up the price of shares. Yep, that's true. And what happens when you push up the price of shares? It means that people pay more for them and they want a bigger return on their investment, and that means higher electricity prices. And I ask any one of those national MPs, the lobby fodder that the backbench represents, whether they will go back into their electorate next week and say, I went into the lobbies today to vote for a measure to put your power prices up by $300 a year. Will one of them have the courage to do that and be honest with their electorate? Not on your life, Mr Chairman. We know what's going to happen with this sale. Contact Energy was sold by Bill English in 1999, and there was, first of all, 225,000 investors. Within 10 years, that was 80,000. But even that doesn't tell the whole picture. You know that 80% of the shares of Contact Energy, once proudly owned by New Zealand, are owned by 0.1% of the owners. Not 1%, 1/10 of 1% of the shareholders own 80% of Contact Energy. And which national backbencher thinks that it's a great idea that $1.5 billion in New Zealand funds have left this country as dividends to the new Australian owners? Which one of them are proud of their National Party record in that regard? Which one of them will stand up? It only takes one of you to stand up in the House tonight, vote against your government, and you can defeat this measure. Which one of you will have the courage to do that? Well, sadly, Mr Chairman, I fear that that is right. Mr Chairman, the government's election commitment was not to let most of the shares go into foreign ownership. Nothing in this bill tonight delivers on that commitment. What word do you use for a commitment that you don't intend to keep? It's deceit. There's another shorter word, and I can't use it in the House, but pure and simple, that was a deceitful commitment by John Key to the people of New Zealand that he never intended to keep. And when the New Zealanders turn out to the polls in 2014, they will remember that they were lied to. They will remember that. They will remember that they were deceived. They will remember that the National Party never delivered on what it promised, and it delivered on a lot of things that it never promised, including the cuts that are happening across the board. Mr Chairman, one sign in the 1950s of this country's progress in moving forward was the building of our hydro dams and our geothermal stations. We didn't know then, but we know now, that that is one of the most important strategic assets that we have as a country. Clean, sustainable, renewable energy. And what is this National Party government going to do with that and its Klingon supporters, ACT and United Future? They are going to sell those assets down the road. They are going to sell them at the bottom of the market so that the people, the foreign investors that buy them, will make a killing. And when they make a killing and selling them, they won't be paying any capital gains tax on it either. Mr Speaker, our parents did not make the sacrifice they did in building up these assets to have them sold out by this national government, which is a sell-out government.
Todd McLean.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. That was